The peace process between Israel and the Palestinians has been underway for nearly 20 years, but you'd never know it by looking at the textbooks Palestinians use to educate their children. This is a map of Israel from a 4th grade textbook. All of the cities are designated by Arabic names. There are no signs that another people even live on this same strip of land, and this is the map used almost without exception up to grade 12.
The treatment across the curriculum is that Palestine is one, all the Negev is Palestine, Haifa is Palestine, Tel Aviv doesn't exist, so you have only Jaffa. There is nothing about the kibbutzim, there is nothing about Israeli industry.
The state of Israel and much of Jewish history has been quite literally wiped off the maps and pages of the Palestinian Authority's official textbooks, says Israeli professor Eldad Pardo. He's the director of a watchdog group, Impact SE. His team monitors the textbooks used in hundreds of PA schools across the West Bank and Gaza for their views on Israel, Jews, and peace. The idea of coexistence and compromise with Israel, he says, are absent in Palestinian textbooks.
They educate their children to return all the refugees, meaning the end of Israel, because it means millions of Arabs from all over the area coming to Israel, and they expect this as the only thing, and there is no justice at all and no historical background.
Jews and Israelis are most often portrayed, he says, as evil invaders. Arab language journalist Arnon Groys ran Impact for 10 years before Pardo took over. Groys has translated hundreds of Palestinian textbooks and studied the Israeli ones too. He's now an advisor on a new study of the textbook sponsored by U.S. President Barack Obama's administration.
My impression is that while Israeli school books do educate Israeli school children to think about a peaceful solution, and they never advocate a violent solution to the problem, to the conflict, Palestinian school books, on the other hand, do not speak of any peaceful solution to the conflict with Israel. They demonize Israel and to some extent the Jews as well.
Most independent studies show Palestinian textbooks deny Jews ever lived in the land of Israel in ancient times, despite undisputed mounds of archaeological and historical evidence to the contrary.
There used to be, in one of the books, a map of the Jewish quarter, and it said that there is a holy place, there was a Jewish quarter, but they didn't mention the holy place for the Jews, meaning the Wailing Wall. But there was still a Jewish quarter. Now this map has been erased. Okay, let's go. Let's see something.
Pardo showed me some of the textbooks in his office. I saw the Palestinian maps with no signs of Israel, altered stamps from the 1920s British Mandate period with the Hebrew letters now blocked out. And he showed me an example of a story taught to children in 6th grade, that's 11-year-olds, which glorifies martyrdom.
This is a story about the hero, the sayings of the heroes. So what it says here, for example, is that your enemies are looking for life, while you are looking for death. Actually, they are educating their children to sacrifice and to die, and they argue that, other people, they just love life. So actually, they put life in an inferior position. You should prefer death.
Lessons about martyrs are found across the curriculum. There are no direct calls to kill Jews, but many critics say they encourage Palestinian children to engage in terrorist activities against Israel.
Accounts about the Jews often, particularly in the religious schools, are pretty much anti-Semitic, and has both in all the educational system, there is a view that the war against Israel and the Jews will continue forever. Forever means until the day of resurrection. And this will happen by way of jihad and by way of ribat. Jihad is a holy war, ribat is a guerrilla holy war.
The content of Palestinian textbooks have raised alarm bells ever since the Oslo Peace Accords were signed. Requests by Israeli, American, and European officials that they be rewritten led in 2006 to some revisions. It's bred suspicion among some that while Palestinian leaders talk about peace, they're preparing the next generation for war. I came here to Ramallah, to the heart of the West Bank, to talk to Palestinian officials at the Ministry of Education about their textbooks. I wanted to hear directly from them their explanations for why so much of their educational material seems to deny the existence of the State of Israel and glorify a culture of martyrdom or death to children. Now, what I discovered is that politics, the politics of resistance, seem to control the educational system here. At the center where Palestinian educational curriculum is developed and written, I met Ali Manasra. He's the Director General in charge of textbook material for the humanities and social studies. He defended the maps that don't acknowledge any Israeli or Jewish presence.
To put borders, it needs to have agreements with the Israelis. To put the borders of Palestine and the borders of Israel, at that time we will tell our students that this is the borders of our state. But till now, you know, Israeli, they stole everything. They stole the land. They stole our land by putting the settlements. They stole too many things.
Manasra had no problems with material that teach Palestinian children little about Israel and little about Jews, except to paint them as enemies and land stealers.
In the moment that Israelis, they give us our rights and they leave West Bank and Gaza through negotiations, at that time we will tell our students that they are our neighbors, they have their own state and we have our own state. But till now, you should remember that we are an occupied people and we are seeking for our independent state.
He showed me the one 11th grade textbook that has 2 pages on the Oslo Peace Accords, a one-time change made in 2006 that never made it into any other material for grades 1 to 10. Palestinian children, he pointed out, are being taught about Jewish history, showing me pictures of the biblical Moses story. But when I asked him about why it's not being taught that Jerusalem's Western Wall was part of the ancient Jewish temple that the Romans destroyed in 70 AD, he insisted the site is an Islamic holy site.
Historically, it is called Ha'it al-Burak.
I understand.
And it is related to an Islamic story belongs to Prophet Muhammad.
And does it not, does it mean anything to Jews? Did it ever in history mean something to Jews, that wall? If
they want to cheat others and to say this holy place, maybe they can say to on any place on the West Bank and Gaza, they can say it is a holy place for us.
Manasra insisted the Palestinians want a peaceful resolution to the conflict with Israel. But why do they teach martyrdom? I want to know why children in grammar school need to look at these poems or pieces of literature, or even teenagers about dying for their country, martyrdom.
If your country is occupied, can you tell me what's your rule? To go on peace process for thousands of years in order to get your state? Or there is another thing, and this is a right for every occupied nations. We are the last occupied nation on the world.
I also spoke with the Palestinian Ministry of Education's international public relations spokesman, Jihad Daradi.
If you look even to international partners who carried assessment to our curricula, like IPCRI and other institutions and UNESCO also, they said that, you know, the allegations and the incitement they are unfounded in the Palestinian curricula.
That's true. The most recent U.S. State Department study of the Palestinian textbooks in 2009 found they don't incite violence against Jews. But the report concluded they do show imbalance, bias, and inaccuracies. By the way, the report Dradi referenced to me, IPCRI, said the same. Can we expect any changes?
This is a political issue. Once the political issue is settled, I think that other things will, you know, gradually and by default they will follow up in terms of the curricula, in terms of the education system in general.
I left Ramallah disturbed. Palestinian children, it seems, are the innocent victims of their leaders' politics. Their minds and hearts are being poisoned in the educational system by those who are willing to sacrifice basic historical facts to perpetuate ignorance, hatred, and in some cases, violence.
The rival side, the other party, has rights as well as party to the conflict, and which should be acknowledged. Now, if you reject the other, there will be no peace. This is for sure. I can assure you of that.
Will the new U.S. study backed by the White House finally rally the international community to force the Palestinian Authority to rewrite the textbooks? Pulling the purse strings might bring the printing presses to a screeching halt, and it may help the cause of peace. Jordana Miller, JN1, Jerusalem.